The conference room on the 19th floor of Harrington and Cole Consulting fell completely silent. 12 faces turned toward Malik Thompson. 11 of them looked away just as quickly, but one man held his gaze. Greg Whitman stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. His voice was calm, almost pleasant, as he spoke words designed to cut deep. It seems our Howard intern may have overestimated his capabilities. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. Malik's jaw tightened. His hands remained still on the table. He said nothing. Everyone in that room knew something was wrong, but nobody said a word. 2 months earlier, Malik Thompson had stood at Union Station in Washington, D.C., watching the morning crowd rush past him. He was 22 years old, freshly graduated from Howard University, and about to walk into the most important opportunity of his life. He paused for a moment, adjusting his tie. It wasn't expensive. He'd found it on a clearance rack at Macy's in Prince George's County, but it was clean. It was pressed, and he wore it with purpose. Malik had already beaten the odds more times than he could count. Raised in Southeast D.C. by his mother, Denise Thompson, he grew up watching exhaustion etched into her face every morning when she came home from her night shift at Howard University Hospital. She worked as a nurse for 23 years, and she believed in 2 things with unwavering faith: education and integrity. The night before his first day at Harrington and Cole, Denise had handed him a small leather notebook. It was worn at the edges, nothing fancy, but she pressed it into his hands like it was precious. "Write everything down," she told him, "just in case." Malik had smiled, thinking she was being overly cautious. He didn't understand then. He would later. "This internship," she continued, her voice steady but soft, "isn't just about the job. It's about how you carry yourself when nobody thinks you belong." Those words stayed with him as he walked into the marble and glass tower that housed Harrington and Cole Consulting. The firm was one of the most prestigious on the East Coast. White shoe clients, government contracts worth millions, Fortune 500 names scattered across their portfolio like trophies. The 19th floor gleamed with the kind of quiet wealth that whispered rather than shouted. Malik stepped off the elevator into the main reception area. Crystal light fixtures, fresh flowers on every surface. The scent of money and power hung in the air like expensive cologne. He was one of 12 interns selected for the summer program. By the end of the first orientation session, held in a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Capitol, Malik realized something that settled into his chest like a stone. He was the only black intern in the cohort. The others came from Georgetown, from Yale, from families whose names appeared on donor walls and country club registries. They had connections, handshakes that opened doors, last names that meant something in rooms like this. Malik had none of that. He had his degree. He had his work ethic. And he had the notebook his mother gave him. During the orientation, he noticed the way some of the other interns glanced at him. Polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Double takes when he answered questions correctly. The unspoken question hung in the air, following him from room to room. How did he get here? Malik ignored it. He focused on the materials in front of him, on learning names and processes and protocols. He told himself that his work would speak for itself. That excellence was the best response to doubt. But that question followed him all the way to Gregory Whitman's office. Greg Whitman was the manager of the Strategic Analysis Department, the division Malik had been assigned to. His corner office sat at the end of a long hallway lined with framed awards and photographs of handshakes with senators. When Malik knocked on the open door that first afternoon, Greg didn't look up from his dual monitors. "Come in," he said, still typing. Malik stepped inside, standing respectfully until Greg finally swiveled his chair around. The man was in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of Ivy League polish that seemed embedded in his DNA. His voice was smooth, controlled, the kind of voice that sounded calm even when it wasn't. "Malik, right?" Greg asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Yes, sir." Greg nodded slowly, his eyes scanning Malik from head to toe in a way that felt like an assessment and a dismissal all at once. "You're the intern from—" He paused, just long enough for the silence to carry weight. "Howard." "Yes, sir," Malik repeated, keeping his voice steady. Greg leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a smirk. "We'll see how you do." 4 words. That was all. But they didn't sound like encouragement. They sounded like a verdict already decided. Malik felt in his gut, a warning he couldn't yet name. He thanked Greg and left the office, walking back to his assigned cubicle with those words echoing in his mind. "We'll see how you do." Malik didn't know it yet. But those 4 words were the beginning of a calculated destruction designed to push him out before he ever had a chance to prove himself. Greg Whitman had a reputation at Harrington and Cole. It wasn't the kind of reputation that got discussed openly in conference rooms or documented in HR files. It was a kind that traveled through whispered conversations near the coffee machine, exchanged glances when his name appeared on meeting invites, and careful silence from those who had worked under him before. He wasn't loud. He wasn't overtly cruel. He didn't raise his voice or pound tables or make threats that could be reported. Greg Whitman was toxic in quieter ways. He smiled while undermining people. He offered compliments that somehow left you feeling smaller. He used institutional power like a surgeon uses a scalpel, cutting precisely where it would hurt most while leaving no visible scars. Greg didn't need to shout. He had something more dangerous than volume. He had authority that nobody questioned. By the second week of his internship, Malik began to notice the patterns. Assignments would arrive in his inbox with vague instructions and impossible deadlines. When he asked clarifying questions, Greg would respond with thinly veiled condescension, suggesting that the task should be self-explanatory for someone of Malik's supposed caliber. Deadlines would shift without warning. Malik would complete a project by Tuesday, only to discover on Wednesday that it had actually been due Monday, that Greg had sent an updated timeline to everyone except him. Feedback came late, or not at all. Malik would submit work and hear nothing for days, left wondering if his analysis was being reviewed or simply ignored. When criticism finally arrived, it was always delivered publicly, always in front of others, always with that calm, pleasant tone that made it impossible to object without seeming defensive. Meanwhile, other interns flourished under praise Malik helped earn. He watched as an intern named Bradley Worthington presented market research that Malik had compiled at 2 a.m. Greg stood at the front of the room, nodding approvingly, calling Bradley's work exceptional, thorough, exactly what the client needed. Bradley smiled and accepted the compliment without acknowledging Malik's contribution. Malik sat in the back row, silent, his jaw tight. He stayed late every night that second week. While other interns left at 6 to grab drinks in Georgetown, Malik remained at his desk, triple-checking every calculation, every citation, every formatting detail. He documented everything in the notebook his mother had given him. Dates, times, instructions received, work submitted, responses given. He didn't know why he felt compelled to write it all down. Something in his gut told him to keep records, just in case. He wasn't the only one who noticed the way Greg treated him. There was another intern, a guy named Ethan Reynolds from Princeton, who sat in the cubicle adjacent to Malik's. Ethan had sandy brown hair and the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to prove he belonged anywhere. He wasn't unkind, exactly, but he wasn't brave either. Malik caught Ethan watching him sometimes, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face when Greg made pointed comments about Malik's work. But Ethan never said anything. He looked away quickly, pretending to focus on his computer screen, choosing silence over solidarity. By the third week, the Mid-Atlantic Health System's pitch became the center of everyone's attention. It was the biggest client opportunity of the quarter, a multi-million-dollar government contract that would cement Harrington and Cole's dominance in the healthcare consulting sector. Senior partners were personally involved. Every department was contributing. The pressure was immense. Greg called Malik into his office on a Monday afternoon and assigned him a critical task. "I need you to compile the market research data for presentation," Greg said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Demographics, competitor analysis, regulatory landscape. Everything needs to be accurate and complete." Malik nodded, already mentally organizing the work ahead. "Email me the finalized figures by Thursday, 5 p.m. sharp," Greg continued. Not a minute late. This goes directly into the partner presentation on Friday. Understood, Malik replied. He worked through Wednesday night without sleeping. He cross-referenced every data point against 3 separate sources. He formatted the spreadsheets exactly as requested. He wrote clear summaries and double-checked his calculations until his eyes burned. On Thursday at 4:12 p.m., 48 minutes before the deadline, Malik sent an email. The attachments were clearly labeled. The subject line was professional. Everything was exactly as instructed. Greg's response came 17 minutes later. 2 words. Got it. No acknowledgement of the quality. No thank you for the early submission. No indication that anything was right or wrong. Malik stared at those 2 words for a long moment. Something felt off. But he told himself he was being paranoid. The work was done. It was thorough. It was correct. He had done everything right. The next morning, Malik walked into the main conference room for the partner presentation. Senior executives filled the leather chairs around the table. Greg stood at the front, clicking through slides on a large screen behind him. Everything seemed normal until Greg stopped scrolling. His face shifted just slightly. That calm, controlled expression tightened around the edges. "These figures are wrong," Greg announced to the room. "They're incomplete." Malik's stomach dropped. Every head in the room turned toward him. "I double-checked them," Malik said carefully, keeping his voice steady despite the heat rising in his chest. Greg raised one eyebrow, tilting his head slightly. "Are you saying I misread your email?" The room went silent. One partner sighed heavily. Another scribbled notes without looking up. No one spoke in Malik's defense. No one asked to see the original email. No one questioned Greg's assessment. Greg nodded slowly. "We'll discuss this later." The meeting continued, but Malik barely heard another word. His mind raced, replaying every step of his process. He knew his work was correct. He knew the figures were complete. After the meeting, he returned to his desk and opened his sent folder. The email was there. Timestamp. Thursday for 12 p.m. attachments. 3 Excel files, clearly labeled, exactly as submitted. Everything was intact. But somehow, something had gone wrong. And Malik was beginning to realize that the problem wasn't his work. The problem was something else entirely. Something he couldn't yet prove. Something that felt deliberate. The changes started small, almost imperceptible at first. But Malik noticed. He noticed everything now. First came the emails. Group threads he'd been included on suddenly stopped appearing in his inbox. Project updates circulated to the entire intern cohort, except his address was mysteriously missing from the recipient list. Meeting invites arrived late, or not at all. Malik would walk past conference rooms and see his fellow interns huddled around tables, discussing assignments he hadn't been told about. Then came the physical isolation. On a Tuesday morning, Malik arrived at his cubicle to find it empty. His computer, his files, his personal items had been relocated without notice. A facilities manager directed him to his new workspace, a cramped corner near the copy room, separated from the rest of the intern area by a wall of filing cabinets. Space optimization, the manager explained, not meeting Malik's eyes. The other interns avoided him now. Conversation stopped when he approached. Eye contact became rare. The polite smiles from orientation had disappeared entirely, replaced by uncomfortable silence. Ethan Reynolds was the only one who acknowledged what was happening. One afternoon, he leaned across the filing cabinets, separating their workspaces, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "Man, you should be careful," Ethan whispered. "Greg's been saying you're not detail-oriented, telling partners you've been making mistakes." Malik swallowed hard. He wanted to confront Greg directly, to demand an explanation, to defend himself publicly. But his mother's voice echoed in his mind. Silence reveals more than confrontation. Watch. Wait. Document. So Malik stayed quiet. And he watched. 3 weeks into his systematic isolation, Malik stayed late at the office to complete a project Greg claimed he had never finished. It was past 9 in the evening. The 19th floor was empty except for the cleaning crew making their rounds. Malik was reviewing his email when a notification popped up on his screen. Delivery failure. Confused, he clicked on it. The message referenced an email he had no memory of sending, dated 2 weeks earlier, sent from his work account to Greg Whitman, containing a spreadsheet filled with incorrect data and incomplete analysis. Malik's heart began to pound. He checked his sent folder. The email wasn't there. He searched his drafts, his deleted items, his archives. Nothing. But the delivery failure notification was real, time-stamped and logged in the system. He looked at the date and time of the original send. Tuesday, 2 weeks ago at 9:47 p.m. Malik pulled out his phone and opened his calendar. That Tuesday night, he had been at Georgetown University, attending a professional development seminar required for his internship credit. He had signed in at 7 p.m. and left at 10:30 p.m. His phone's location history confirmed it. His name was on the attendance sheet. He could not have sent that email. He wasn't even in the building. Someone had accessed his account. Malik's hands trembled slightly as he began digging deeper into the system. He wasn't particularly tech-savvy, but he knew enough to pull basic metadata from email headers. He copied the technical information from the failed delivery notification and ran a search through the company's internal network logs, which were accessible to all employees for troubleshooting purposes. The IP address that sent the fraudulent email traced back to a specific terminal, Gregory Whitman's office computer. Malik sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. The cleaning crew's vacuum hummed somewhere down the hall. City lights glittered through the window beside him. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Greg Whitman had accessed Malik's email account and sent fraudulent messages to sabotage him. The setup was deliberate, calculated, designed to build a paper trail of failure that would justify pushing Malik out. But proving it was another matter entirely. 2 days later, Malik received a calendar invite from Human Resources. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon, marked as urgent and confidential. He walked into Susan Keller's office at the appointed time. Susan was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. She gestured to a chair across from her desk, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "Thank you for coming, Malik. I'll get straight to the point." Malik nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the tension coiling in his chest. "There have been concerns raised about your performance," Susan continued, "specifically regarding your attention to detail and, more troubling, your honesty." The word hit Malik like a slap. Honesty. "I haven't been dishonest about anything," he said, his voice steady but firm. Susan tilted her head sympathetically. "The reports we received suggest otherwise. Incomplete work submitted as finished. Incorrect data presented to partners. Emails that don't match what you claim to have sent." Malik took a slow breath. He reached into his bag and pulled out the leather notebook his mother had given him. "Someone has been accessing my email account," he said carefully. "I can prove it. I have documentation of every assignment I've completed, every email I've sent, every deadline I've met." He slid the notebook across Susan's desk. She glanced at it. Her expression didn't change. She didn't open it. "These are serious accusations, Malik." "I know. That's why I documented everything." Susan sighed, pushing the notebook back toward him. "We'll review this. But in the meantime, given the severity of the concerns raised, you're being placed on probation. One more incident, and the internship will be terminated." Probation. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Malik understood what it meant. He was one fabricated mistake away from losing everything. His internship, his reference letters, his career before it even started. That night, Malik didn't sleep. He lay in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past weeks. He had done everything right. He had worked harder than anyone. He had documented, verified, and triple-checked every task. And it didn't matter. The system was designed to protect people like Greg. People with power, with tenure, with the right last name and the right handshake. For the first time since walking into Harrington & Cole, Malik wondered if fighting was worth it. Maybe they wanted him gone. Maybe they always had. Maybe the outcome was decided before he ever adjusted his clearance rack tie and stepped off the train at Union Station. He thought about calling his mother, but he couldn't bring himself to dial. He didn't want her to hear the defeat in his voice. Instead, he made a decision. He would not quit. He would not surrender. If they wanted him out, they would have to prove their case against him, and he would build his own case in the meantime. The next morning, Malik checked his email before leaving for the office. One message waited in his inbox, sent from an address he didn't recognize. Sender, unknown@consult.com. Subject, be careful who you trust. He opened it. The message was brief, just 2 sentences. Greg has done this before. Check the server logs. Someone inside Harrington and Cole knew the truth. Someone had been watching, and that someone wanted Greg Whitman exposed. Malik read the anonymous message 3 times, memorizing every word before closing his laptop. Someone at Harrington and Cole knew what Greg was doing. Someone had seen the pattern before. And now that someone was reaching out, he spent the next 2 days trying to identify the sender. The email address was a temporary internal account, the kind IT sometimes created for testing purposes. Whoever sent it knew how to cover their tracks. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, Malik found himself alone in the break room on the 17th floor. He was pouring coffee when a woman walked in, someone he recognized but had never spoken to directly. Linda Morales. She worked in IT, a quiet presence who had been with the company for over 2 decades. She was nearing retirement, with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on her head. Linda filled her mug without speaking, but as she turned to leave, she paused beside Malik. "You're the intern from the 19th floor," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." Linda studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "I've been at this company for 23 years. I've watched a lot of young people come through these doors. Bright kids, talented kids. Some of them made it, some of them didn't, and some of them were pushed out by people who couldn't stand to see them succeed." Malik stayed silent, sensing she had more to say. "I've seen your type before," Linda continued. "The ones who work twice as hard and get half the credit. The ones who document everything because something tells them to. The ones who trust the system even when the system isn't designed to protect them." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small sticky note. She pressed it into Malik's hand. "Server logs. Archive metadata. Everything employees think nobody checks." She met his eyes. "I've seen this before. Don't let them win." Before Malik could respond, Linda walked out of the break room without looking back. He unfolded the sticky note. Written in neat handwriting were instructions for accessing archived email server logs to the company's internal IT portal. Everything Linda mentioned was technically available to all employees for troubleshooting purposes. It wasn't hidden. It was just overlooked. That night, Malik stayed at the office until long after everyone else had left. Following Linda's instructions, he navigated to the server log archives and began searching for records of activity on his email account. What he found confirmed everything he suspected. There were multiple instances of his account being accessed from a terminal that wasn't his own. Each login occurred during hours when Malik was verifiably elsewhere, either at Georgetown for evening seminars or logged out of the building according to security records. Every unauthorized access originated from the same IP address, Greg Whitman's office computer. Malik documented each entry, photographing the screen with his phone, copying timestamps into his notebook, creating backup files on his personal cloud storage. The pattern was undeniable. Someone using Greg's terminal had logged into Malik's account at least 7 times over the past 2 months. Each time, an email containing errors or incomplete work had been sent, building a false record of incompetence. But the server logs alone weren't enough. They proved unauthorized access, but they didn't prove intent. They didn't explain why Greg was doing this or whether anyone else was involved. Then, on a Friday night at 2:03 a.m., Malik received an email that changed everything. He was still at his desk, reviewing documents, when the notification appeared. The sender was Greg Whitman. The subject line made Malik's blood run cold. Intern situation. Proceed as discussed. Malik opened the email with trembling hands. It was clear within seconds that the message had been sent to him by mistake. Greg had been forwarding an internal thread to his personal email address, likely to keep records off company servers. But he had mistyped the address, accidentally sending it to Malik instead. The attached thread spanned weeks of correspondence between Greg and at least 3 other individuals, including Susan Keller from HR and a senior partner Malik didn't recognize. The messages were damning. "Once he's gone, HR will back us. They always do. Just keep documenting his so-called mistakes. Build the file. Make it airtight. The federal compliance audit is coming up. We need to clean house before then. Non-culture fits need to go." Attached to one of the messages was a list of names. Interns and junior employees from the past 5 years. Each name had notes beside it. Terminated for performance issues. Resigned under pressure. Contract not renewed. At the bottom of the list, circled in red, was Malik Thompson's name. This wasn't just about him. This was systematic. Greg Whitman had been targeting black interns and minority employees for years, manufacturing evidence of failure to push them out before they could establish themselves. HR was complicit. At least one senior partner was involved. The scope of corruption extended far beyond one toxic manager. Malik sat in the empty office, city lights blinking through the windows, his hands still shaking. He now had everything: proof of account tampering, evidence of conspiracy, documentation of systemic discrimination. But exposing this wouldn't just end an internship. It would trigger federal investigations. It would destroy careers, possibly include his own if powerful people decided to retaliate. The firm would fight back with resources and lawyers and institutional weight that Malik couldn't match. His phone buzzed on the desk. A text from his mother. "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you." Malik closed his eyes. He thought about every late night, every dismissive comment, every moment of doubt. He thought about his mother's hands, worn from decades of night shifts. He thought about the names on that list, the people who came before him, who were pushed out and silenced. The truth was in his hands now. But truth has weight, and Malik had to decide if he was strong enough to carry it forward. Malik spent the weekend planning his next move. He couldn't go to HR. Susan Keller was compromised. He couldn't leak to the media. That would backfire legally and destroy his credibility before he finished telling his story. He needed someone inside the firm with both power and integrity, someone who could act on the evidence without burying it. After hours of research, he found her, Margaret Chun, senior partner in ethics and compliance. She was the only Asian American woman at the partner level, known for her independence and rumored to have pushed back against firm culture in the past. She wasn't part of Greg's network. She might be different. On Monday morning, Malik requested a meeting through official channels. He kept the subject line neutral. A matter requiring confidential review. Margaret's assistant responded within an hour, scheduling him for Tuesday at 8 in the morning. He arrived at Margaret's corner office with his notebook, printed copies of the server logs, and screenshots of Greg's accidentally forwarded email thread. His hands were steady. His voice was calm. Margaret listened without interrupting as Malik walked her through the evidence. The timeline of sabotage. The IP address log showing unauthorized access from Greg's terminal. The email thread detailing years of coordinated discrimination. The list of names. The HR complicity. When he finished, Margaret sat in silence for a long moment. Her expression had shifted from skepticism to recognition to cold anger. "This references a Daniels audit," she said quietly, pointing to a line in the email thread. "I remember that name. There was an intern 3 years ago. Brilliant kid. Left suddenly. The file said performance issues." She looked up at Malik. "I didn't question it then." She picked up her phone and made a call. Within 1 hour, the firm's legal counsel was involved. Greg was called to the main conference room without explanation. Senior partners were notified of an urgent compliance matter. Federal investigators would be contacted before the day ended. At 3 in the afternoon, Malik walked into the same conference room where he had been humiliated weeks earlier. This time, the seats were filled with people who mattered. Senior partners, legal counsel, Susan Keller, looking pale and rigid, Margaret Chun, standing at the head of the table, and Greg Whitman, who had walked in expecting a routine meeting and frozen the moment he saw Malik seated across from him. Margaret wasted no time. She read portions of the email thread aloud, her voice steady and deliberate. The server logs appeared on the screen behind her. The pattern of sabotage was laid bare for everyone to see. Greg tried to interrupt. This is a misunderstanding. The logs could have been tampered with. Margaret raised a hand. We've already verified the metadata with independent IT analysis. The access came from your terminal, using your credentials, during hours you were logged into the building. Greg shifted tactics. He accessed files without authorization. This is a violation of company policy. Every file he accessed was available to all employees. Margaret replied. You're the one who violated policy. You accessed his email account 7 times without consent. You sent fraudulent messages designed to damage his record. And you coordinated with HR to build a false case for termination. The room was silent. One of the senior partners closed his eyes and shook his head slowly. Another stared at Greg with barely concealed disgust. Greg opened his mouth to speak again, but no words came. For the first time since Malik had met him, Greg Whitman had nothing to say. Margaret delivered the verdict without emotion. Greg Whitman, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Susan Keller, you are suspended pending a full investigation into HR's involvement. The firm will cooperate fully with federal compliance authorities. An internal review of all hiring and termination practices will begin this week. Security guards entered the room. Greg stood slowly, his face drained of color, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He didn't look at Malik as he was escorted out, but Malik looked at him. He watched every step Greg took toward the door, watched the box of belongings security had already packed, watched the man who had tried to destroy his career disappear from the 19th floor for the last time. After Greg was gone, Margaret turned to Malik. I'm sorry this happened to you, she said. What can we do? Malik took a breath. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't celebrate. He didn't demand anything excessive. I didn't do this for revenge, he said quietly. I just want to be treated fairly, and I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Margaret nodded. What do you need? Remove the probation from my record. Issue a written apology from the firm. Commit to reviewing how minority interns and employees are treated. And I like a reference letter from you personally. All granted. Malik completed his internship with distinction. 3 months later, he received a full-time offer from Harrington & Cole. He declined politely, accepting instead a position at a competing firm that had heard about his integrity and wanted someone like him on their team. On his last day, Malik visited his mother. He handed her the worn leather notebook she had given him the night before his first day. It saved me, Mama. Denise Thompson held her son, tears streaming down her face. No, baby, you saved yourself. I just gave you the tools. 2 months after Malik left, Linda Morales retired from Harrington & Cole. Malik sent her flowers with a note. Thank you for seeing me. She kept the card in her wallet for the rest of her life. Ethan Reynolds found Malik in the lobby on his final afternoon. He looked uncomfortable, his usual easy confidence replaced by something heavier. I should have said something earlier, Ethan admitted. I saw what was happening. I knew it wasn't right, and I stayed silent. Malik looked at him for a long moment. Next time, say something. He walked out of Harrington & Cole with his head high, his record clean, and his integrity intact. The truth hadn't needed to be loud. It just needed to be written down. Malik Thompson walked into that building as an intern nobody expected to last. He walked out as a man who exposed corruption, protected future employees, and never once lost his dignity. He didn't seek revenge. He documented the truth and let it speak for itself. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the most power because they're watching when everyone else thinks nobody's paying attention. Greg Whitman thought he was untouchable. He forgot the oldest lesson there is. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be written down. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think justice was truly served, or should the consequences have gone further? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, these are the voices that deserve to be heard.